FBI Director Kash Patel warned the case highlights the Chinese Communist Party's ongoing efforts to infiltrate the U.S. institutions and threaten the nation's food supply and economy. Is it Jean, a postdoctoral fellow, allegedly received Chinese government funding and his documented ties to the CCP, while Liu admitted to smuggling the pathogen through Detroit's airport. Federal officials describe the case as a serious national security threat and part of a broader effort to crack down on foreign actors exploiting U.S. universities. The rest comes amid rising scrutiny of Chinese nationals in critical research fields and renewed visa enforcement efforts by the Trump administration. So the question is, how does this case fit into the bigger picture of Chinese influence and infiltration in U.S. research institutions? How does this kind of biothreat compare to more traditional terror threats like explosive and cyber attacks?
Yeah, it's all part and parcel. I mean, I think this is an interesting case because it's a little clearer for the general public, I think, to understand, right? Sometimes you can talk about a Chinese counterintelligence operation that the FBI is running, and then, people glaze over a little bit. But this is a fascinating one. So you had this couple, right? And so the girl, I think it's still okay to refer to people as girls and boys, but the girl,
I think we need to let them choose. I mean, we're being very assumptive here.
That's right. Okay, so them was working in the lab in Michigan, and her boyfriend brought in this fungus, and he also was doing research, but in China at his institute. And the information so far looks like he wanted to continue that research there in Michigan, where she was based and doing her work, possibly because, the lab was more advanced, possibly because she was also working in a related field and they wanted to collaborate. Point being is, he's now back in China. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that looked like in terms of having him fly back to China, but he lied to the federal authorities, charges of smuggling. And this this fungus potentially causes something called head blight, which, as you pointed out, could devastate crops, a variety of crops, and is dangerous to humans and livestock. So potentially, that's why they're calling it an agroterrorism element, is it could have caused massive devastation, frankly. And it sounds as if the Chinese researchers were doing work. It's not clear, were they looking at how to weaponize it? Were they looking at how to fight against it? Doesn't matter. They lied. They were doing this. And the bottom line is the Chinese regime for generations has been taking advantage of, U.S. academic institutions to steal information. There's no, I don't want to sugarcoat it. That's basically what they do. So whether it's economic espionage, whether it's theft of intellectual property, whether it's theft of research and development, they have done, the regime again, not the Chinese people. Yeah, they're wonderful, great culture, great history, amazing history. But the regime itself and their intel apparatus are enormously aggressive. And they work constantly to hoover up every bit of information they can get their hands on that could benefit the Chinese state. And there's no firewall between the intel apparatus and their, supposed independent companies or sectors. They're all state operated because they're all required to cooperate with the Chinese Communist Party. So that's just, I'm not like spreading rumors here. That's been verified time and time and time and time again. And the FBI, look, they open up a Chinese-related counterintelligence operation on average about once a day. So this is a serious, serious problem.
What kind of firewalls do we have, or is it even possible to have firewalls at the U.S. institutions? Because people should do some research on the number of, and I'm not against people going to the best location to find the highest level of education, because like 1% out of the 99 who are there for trying to better their life for altruistic reasons, that 1% who is there to try to, like you said, hoover up that information, how does schools safeguard against that? I mean, what mechanisms are there in place?
Yeah, the schools are probably the weakest link in trying to say who can vet these students, because, academic institutions by their very nature are collaborative. They share information constantly. They want that research, and they never look at things from a cynical counterintelligence perspective, particularly, the Ivy Leagues and others that are, however you want to put it, more progressive. But so the bottom line is it's incumbent upon the U.S. government during that visa process, right? To do proper vetting. And that's also a weak link. That's where things fall down. Whether you're talking about a potential Chinese researcher coming into an academic institution, or you're talking about somebody who's just made the trek up south, and is trying to get through the border. The vetting process has always been a problem. And so, but imagine it's a problem in a country like, pick one, Haiti, Afghanistan, Venezuela, where the infrastructure isn't really there, right, to go in and review somebody's background and get that vetting done. But imagine how much more difficult it is when you're talking about the Chinese regime wanting to send somebody who is a cooperative asset of their intel apparatus into the States. Now you've layered on something that's much more complex.
Yeah. Working at your old job and looking at threats, this one seems to have gotten people's attention, and maybe it's because they had just never considered that a mushroom or a fungus could have this level of impact. But when it comes to the intelligence apparatus of the U.S., I remember shortly after 9/11, I swear I heard them talking about, they're going to put sarin gas or whatever, or something in the water supply. So you hear a little bit about that. There's obviously a lot of talk about physical threats, either airplanes, explosives, fill in the blank. Do they all get an equal level of scrutiny? I mean, in the how is it I guess the point I'm trying to get to is like the number of potential threats coming in, it seems almost unlimited. So in the intelligence apparatus, do they pay attention to stuff as it pops up, or are they trying to literally look at unlimited options and see where the threats are coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. If I was going to be cynical and simplistic, I'd say, look, they always game for the last attack, right? So remember when truck bombs were the thing, right? And all of a sudden there were bollards up in front of every federal building and any building of consequence. Well, that'll stop the attacks. Well, they had already moved on to the next potential scenario, meaning the bad guys, for how to conduct an attack. The reality is there's some of that, right? They were always kind of looking back a little bit and saying, well, how do we defend against that, which has already happened? But there's also a lot of hard work being done by very good people who are trying to figure out what does that next attack look like? What's the potential scenarios that the terrorists or others are thinking about, or state-sponsored hostile actors are thinking about? So it's a combination of the two. And we've gotten better at it, because if you had asked me that question 25 years ago, I would have said, no, it's always backwards looking, right? We're always defending against whatever happened last. But we have gotten much better at looking at it and trying to understand, I don't want to say creativity of the terrorists, because that may give them more credit. They're just always looking to figure out how to beat the system.
Yeah, it's like water looking for the path of least resistance.
Right.